When Colonel Marcus Brennan looked at Zara Novak, he saw what everyone else saw: a woman barely 5 feet tall, weighing maybe 110 pounds, soaking wet, teaching weekend warriors how to tie knots and build campfires in the Montana wilderness. What he didn't see was the scar hidden beneath her hiking boots from a classified mission in Afghanistan, or the way her eyes tracked movement like someone trained to spot threats from 1,000 yards away. He certainly didn't see the ghost of Phantom Division's most decorated combat search and rescue specialist, a woman who once carried 3 wounded soldiers through 40 miles of hostile desert without stopping once to rest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But in 12 hours, when enemy bullets would be ripping through the pine trees of Blackrock Canyon and Brennan's arrogant smirk would be replaced by blood and desperation, he would learn that sometimes the smallest packages contain the most explosive surprises. The morning mist clung to the peaks of the Blackrock Mountains like secrets that refused to be told, and Zara Novak preferred it that way. For 3 years, she had made Millfield, Montana her sanctuary, a place where questions about her past were as rare as cell phone signals and just as easily ignored. The town of 800 souls sat in a valley so remote that Google Maps still showed it as disputed territory, surrounded by wilderness that could swallow a person whole and never give them back. Zara's cover story was simple and believable: former Army medic turned wilderness instructor, teaching corporate executives and college kids how to survive in the great outdoors through her company, Blackrock Adventures. She ran her operation from a converted barn on the outskirts of town, complete with climbing walls, survival courses, and enough camping gear to outfit a small expedition. The locals knew her as the quiet woman who could track a wounded deer through 3 miles of forest or start a fire in a rainstorm. Skills that seemed impressive to civilians, but were barely scratches on the surface of what she could really do. What they didn't know was that the woman teaching their teenagers how to purify water had once infiltrated a Taliban stronghold disguised as a local villager, extracted a captured CIA operative, and fought her way out through 50 miles of enemy territory while carrying a wounded soldier on her back. They didn't know that her medical training included battlefield surgery techniques, classified above most doctors' clearance levels, or that she could disassemble and reassemble 16 different weapon systems blindfolded. Most importantly, they didn't know that Zara Novak wasn't her real name. The truth was buried in files so classified, they required 3 different security clearances just to confirm they existed. Captain Elena Vasquez, callsign Phoenix, had been Phantom Division's most requested rescue specialist, a woman who specialized in impossible extractions from impossible places. Phoenix had died officially in a helicopter crash over the Hindu Kush Mountains. Her body never recovered, her mission sealed under national security protocols that would keep them classified for the next 50 years. But Phoenix hadn't died in that crash. She had been extracted by her own people, given a new identity, and told to disappear forever because she had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Something that involved weapons sales to enemies of the state, murdered witnesses, and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. Phoenix had been marked for elimination, and only the loyalty of her commanding officer had given her the chance to vanish instead of ending up in an unmarked grave. Now, as Zara checked the morning weather reports in her cluttered office, she allowed herself to believe that the past had finally stayed buried. Outside her window, the town was waking up to another peaceful day. Old Henrik was opening his general store. Mrs. Peterson was walking her ancient golden retriever down Main Street, and the coffee shop was already releasing the aroma of fresh brewing that would draw half the town before 9 a.m. The illusion of normalcy shattered when she heard the distinctive sound of military vehicles approaching on the gravel road that led to her property. Not the rumbling pickups that locals drove, but the precisely tuned engines of government transportation. heavy with armor and purpose. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows and no license plates rolled up her driveway in perfect formation, followed by a military transport truck that looked like it could survive a direct artillery hit. Zara's training kicked in immediately. She moved away from the window, her hand instinctively reaching for the concealed weapon she kept strapped beneath her desk. Through the blinds, she watched as soldiers in full combat gear emerged from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't weekend warriors or National Guard reserves. These were active duty special operations personnel, and they had come prepared for resistance. The man who stepped out of the lead SUV was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of uniform that came with enough ribbons and medals to indicate serious combat experience. His steel-gray hair was cut to military precision, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question. Even from a distance, Zara could see the colonel's eagles on his collar and the distinctive insignia of Fort Cascade, the Army's most elite training facility located 200 miles south in the Colorado Rockies. Colonel Marcus Brennan had the look of a man who had never been told he was wrong about anything, and from the way he surveyed her property with obvious disdain, he had already made up his mind about what he expected to find. He gestured to his men with the casual authority of someone who viewed other people as resources to be deployed rather than individuals to be consulted. Zara remained motionless behind her desk as boots crunched across her gravel parking area. She had prepared for this moment for 3 years, running through dozens of scenarios in her mind, but she had always hoped it would remain theoretical. The encrypted communication device hidden in her emergency kit hadn't received a signal in over a year. The bank account in Switzerland that was supposed to fund her new life if she had to run again contained enough money to disappear anywhere in the world. The go bag in her closet held everything she would need to vanish within 20 minutes of receiving a warning. But something felt different about this approach. If they had come to eliminate her, they wouldn't have announced themselves so obviously. If they had come to arrest her, they would have surrounded the building and demanded surrender. Instead, they were walking up to her front door like customers arriving for a scheduled appointment. The knock on her door was polite but firm, the kind of sound that suggested the person making it was accustomed to having doors opened quickly. Zara waited exactly 10 seconds before responding, long enough to suggest she had been busy, but not long enough to appear deliberately uncooperative. When she opened the door, Colonel Brennan was standing on her porch with 2 soldiers flanking him at a respectful distance. Up close, he was even more imposing, at least 6 feet 4 inches tall with the kind of physical presence that filled doorways. His pale blue eyes studied her with the calculating intensity of someone sizing up potential competition, and his expression suggested he had already found her lacking. "Miss Novak," he said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. "I'm Colonel Marcus Brennan, Fort Cascade Training Command. We need to discuss a matter of mutual interest." Zara kept her expression neutral, falling back on the persona she had cultivated over 3 years of careful practice. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I think you might have the wrong person. I run wilderness survival courses, not military training. If you're looking for civilian contractors, I'd recommend contacting the Chamber of Commerce in Helena." Brennan's smile was sharp and cold, the expression of someone who enjoyed having information that others didn't possess. "I don't think I have the wrong person at all. In fact, I'm quite certain you're exactly who I'm looking for. May we come in? I believe you'll find our conversation illuminating." The request was phrased politely, but Zara recognized the underlying command. These weren't people who would be easily discouraged by a closed door or polite refusal. She stepped aside, gesturing them into her office with the kind of resigned cooperation that suggested she understood she had no real choice in the matter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Brennan's men remained outside, but she could see them positioning themselves around her property with the casual efficiency of people who had performed similar operations hundreds of times. They weren't threatening, exactly, but their presence made it clear that leaving wasn't currently an option. Inside her office, Brennan studied the walls covered with wilderness photography, survival equipment displays, and certificates from civilian outdoor education programs. His expression suggested someone examining a particularly unconvincing disguise, and when his gaze lingered on a photo of her leading a group of college students up a mountain trail, his slight smile indicated that he found the whole charade mildly amusing. "Impressive setup," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk without being invited. "Very thorough. The kind of cover identity that takes years to establish properly. You've even got local references, tax records going back to your supposed discharge date, medical records that support your official story. Someone put considerable resources into creating Zara Novak." The name hit her like a physical blow, but Zara maintained her carefully constructed facade. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Colonel, but I can assure you that I'm exactly who my identification says I am. If there's some kind of mix-up with government records, I'd be happy to provide additional documentation." Brennan reached into his jacket and withdrew a tablet, swiping through several screens before placing it on her desk. The display showed classified military personnel files, combat deployment records, and photographs that made Zara's blood run cold. Images of her in desert camouflage, her face younger and harder, standing next to helicopters and military vehicles that officially didn't exist. "Captain Elena Vasquez," Brennan said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone revealing a winning hand. "Call sign Phoenix. Phantom Division, Combat Search and Rescue Specialist. Officially killed in action 3 years ago when her helicopter went down over Afghanistan. Unofficially, extracted by personnel unknown and relocated under a classified witness protection protocol." The silence stretched between them like a wire under tension. Zara could feel her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble, but she had survived worse situations by remaining calm and thinking strategically. "I don't know who you think I am, Colonel, but the facial recognition software is quite sophisticated these days." Brennan interrupted, swiping to another screen that showed side-by-side comparisons of Elena Vasquez and Zara Novak. "Bone structure doesn't lie, even when everything else has been carefully altered. The scar on your left ankle from the Kandahar mission, the slight irregularity in your right shoulder from the helmet extraction, the way you unconsciously position yourself to maintain sight lines to all exits." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "You can maintain this charade if you want, but we both know the truth. The question is whether you're going to help us voluntarily, or whether we're going to have to make this conversation more official." Zara finally allowed her mask to slip slightly, letting him see a glimpse of the woman who had once been Phoenix. "What do you want?" Brennan's smile widened. "There's a situation developing that requires someone with your particular skill set. A joint training exercise between Fort Cascade and several international military units has encountered some complications. We need a combat medic with advanced tactical experience and the ability to operate in hostile environments." "Send someone else," Zara said flatly. "I'm retired." "I'm afraid that's not an option. You see, the exercise isn't taking place at Fort Cascade. It's happening here, in the Blackrock Mountains, using terrain that you know better than anyone else in the country. Local knowledge is essential, and frankly, you're the only person available with the necessary qualifications." Zara stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the mountains that had been her refuge for 3 years. "You're not telling me everything. This isn't about a training exercise." Brennan's expression became carefully neutral. "What makes you say that?" "Because if it was just a training exercise, you wouldn't need someone with my background. You wouldn't have tracked down a dead person and threatened her new identity. And you certainly wouldn't have shown up with enough firepower to level a small town. She turned back to face him. So what's really going on? For the first time since entering her office, Brennan looked slightly uncomfortable. The situation is classified above your current clearance level. I can tell you that. American personnel are involved, that the timeline is critical, and that failure is not an acceptable option. And if I refuse? Brennan's smile returned, but it held no warmth. Then Zara Novak will cease to exist, and Elena Vasquez will be found by people who have been looking for her for 3 years. People who are considerably less interested in her cooperation than I am. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Zara understood that her carefully constructed sanctuary had always been temporary, that the past would eventually find her no matter how deep she buried it. The only question was whether she would face it on her own terms or be dragged back into a world she had tried to escape. When do we leave? She asked. Brennan checked his watch, a military chronometer that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Transport leaves in 1 hour. Pack light, but pack smart. Where? We're going. Equipment failures can be fatal. As Brennan and his men prepared to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at her with an expression that might have been respect if it hadn't been so calculating. One more thing, Captain. Or should I say, Ms. Novak, the personnel you'll be supporting aren't regular military. They're contractors working on a classified project, and they've been briefed to expect a civilian wilderness guide. I'd prefer to keep your real identity between us for now. Why? Because some secrets are more valuable when they remain secret. Your cover identity serves our purposes, and maintaining operational security is everyone's priority. After they left, Zara stood alone in her office, staring at the tablet Brennan had left behind. The screen still displayed her military service record, a chronicle of operations that had taken her to every conflict zone on the planet. Missions that had saved lives, eliminated threats, and occasionally crossed lines that weren't supposed to exist. She moved to the hidden panel behind her bookshelf and retrieved the equipment she had hoped never to use again. Body armor that could stop rifle rounds, medical supplies that included drugs unavailable to civilian doctors, communication devices encrypted with algorithms that changed every 60 seconds. The gear of someone who operated in places where civilization was a memory and survival was measured in heartbeats. As she prepared for whatever lay ahead in the Blackrock Mountains, Zara allowed herself one last look at the peaceful town that had been her home. Tomorrow, the woman who taught college kids how to build campfires would be gone, and in her place would stand Phoenix, a weapon forged in the fires of America's secret wars. What she didn't know was that Colonel Brennan's true mission had nothing to do with training exercises or classified projects. What she didn't know was that she was walking into a trap designed by someone who had been hunting Phoenix for 3 years, someone who knew exactly how to manipulate her sense of duty and honor. And what she definitely didn't know was that before the sun set on the Blackrock Mountains, she would be carrying Colonel Marcus Brennan through 5 miles of enemy fire, his blood on her hands and his life dependent on the skills he had mocked. Just hours before, the game was about to begin, and Phoenix was walking blindly into the crosshairs of an enemy who knew her better than she knew herself. The helicopter ride into the Blackrock Mountains felt like descending into a nightmare wrapped in a veneer of military order. Zara sat quietly in the cargo hold of a custom-outfitted Black Hawk, surrounded by grim-faced soldiers whose hardened expressions hinted at the kind of missions that never made it into public records. Their eyes flicked toward her with thinly veiled curiosity, clearly wondering what a backcountry wilderness guide had done to earn such a high-level military escort. Directly across from her sat Colonel Brennan, his expression unreadable behind standard-issue sunglasses. Throughout the hour-and-a-half flight, he stayed focused on a rugged military tablet, Reviewing classified files and jotting down notes he kept carefully concealed. The only time he acknowledged her was when he handed her a unit and a detailed topographic map. "Your call sign is Guide 1, he said, his voice cutting through the drone of the rotors. "You'll be supporting a 12-man contractor team during an advanced survival training operation in a simulated hostile environment. Your role is to keep them alive, administer medical aid if needed, and help ensure they complete their objectives within 72 hours. Zara studied the map, instantly recognizing terrain features she knew from years of guiding in the Blackrock wilderness. The designated area spanned nearly 40 square miles of harsh, unforgiving mountain terrain, sheer cliffs, thick forest, and weather systems that could turn deadly without warning. "What kind of objectives?" she asked. Brennan offered a tight, practiced smile. "Navigation drills, resource acquisition, team coordination under pressure. Standard survival training, just in a more authentic setting than most facilities can provide." It was a rehearsed answer, one designed to sound informative while saying very little. Zara had seen enough covert operations to know when the truth was being carefully edited. Real survival training didn't usually come with classified documents, or the kind of weapons she'd glimpsed being loaded into the bird. As they neared the drop zone, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Colonel, we've got a storm front coming in from the northwest. Visibility's tanking, and wind gusts are hitting 40 knots. Recommend postponing until conditions improve." Brennan's reply was immediate and firm. "Negative. Mission schedule is fixed. Set us down." Through the misted windows, the Blackrock Mountains appeared like ancient sentinels piercing the clouds, rugged, towering, and untouched. The peaks stretched 10,000 feet skyward, draped in pine forest so dense it looked almost primeval. This was nature at its rawest, stunning and merciless. The helicopter touched down in a narrow clearing, barely large enough for safe landing. Waiting in the tree line stood the contractor team, 12 men in civilian trekking gear who moved with military precision. Their packs were too heavy for a basic training exercise. They looked ready for something far more intense. One man stepped forward, tall and broad, his Nordic features sharp and cold. He wore no insignia, but his presence radiated the confidence of a seasoned operator. When he spoke, there was a faint Eastern European accent, softened by years of integration into American military culture. "Colonel Brennan," he greeted, saluting sharply. "Sergeant Major Viktor Kozlov, team leader. We're ready to begin on your order." Brennan returned the salute and gestured toward Zara. "This is Guide 1, your survival and medical expert. She knows this terrain better than anyone. I suggest you follow her lead." Kozlov turned to Zara, sizing her up in an instant. At just 5 feet tall and lightly built, she didn't look like someone who belonged in a high-risk op. His face remained respectful, but there was a flicker in his eyes, doubt, maybe even condescension. "Ma'am," he said with polite formality, the kind reserved for civilians he had to accept but didn't necessarily trust. "We'll value your input." The faint edge in his voice was familiar. Zara had encountered it throughout her career assumptions about strength and capability based on appearance. She knew better than to argue. Letting actions speak was far more effective. Brennan glanced at his watch and addressed the group. "Mission starts now. Navigate to checkpoint Alpha using only compass and map. Establish a perimeter and await further orders. The weather's turning fast, so move with purpose." As the helicopter lifted off, leaving them alone in the wilderness, Zara studied the team's equipment and movement patterns. These weren't weekend warriors playing soldier in the woods. Their gear was high-end military surplus. Their weapons were clean and well-maintained, and they moved with the unconscious coordination of people who had trained together extensively. Kozlov spread a map on a flat boulder and gathered his men around it. Checkpoint Alpha is 12 kilometers northeast. Elevation gain of approximately 2,000 feet. Terrain includes dense forest, 2 river crossings, and at least 1 technical climbing section. One of his men, a compact soldier with Hispanic features and sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, pointed to a route marked in red ink, Weathers. Closing in fast, Vic. If we take the direct route through Devil's Canyon, we'll be exposed to the worst of it. Kozlov nodded, agreed. We'll use the northern approach, stay in the tree line where possible. He glanced at Zara. Guide 1, what's your assessment of current conditions? Zara studied the topographical features and compared them to the weather patterns she could see developing overhead. Storm clouds were building rapidly, driven by wind systems that would create dangerous conditions in the exposed areas of their planned route. The northern approach adds distance but keeps you below the tree line during the worst of the weather, she said. However, you'll encounter more difficult river crossings, and if the temperature drops as much as I expect, hypothermia becomes a serious risk. Kozlov's expression remained neutral. Alternative recommendations? There's a game trail that runs parallel to Devil's Canyon, about 500 feet lower in elevation. It's not on any official maps, but it'll cut 2 hours off your travel time and provide natural shelter from the wind. One of Kozlov's men, a burly soldier with a Boston accent, laughed quietly. A secret trail that's not on the maps? How convenient. The comment drew chuckles from several other team members. Zara recognized the dynamic immediately newcomers. Being tested, their knowledge and competence questioned until they proved themselves worthy of respect. It was a ritual as old as military service itself, and usually harmless unless lives depended on the outcome. Your choice, she said calmly. But when that storm hits, you'll wish you had taken any shelter you could find. Kozlov made his decision, with the kind of authority that ended discussions. We stick with the planned route. Move out in tactical formation. Maintain radio discipline. As the team began their march into the wilderness, Zara fell into step behind them, noting their formation and communication patterns. They were definitely experienced operators, but their arrogance was already creating problems. The soldier, with the Boston accent, was carrying too much weight in his pack, compensating for his doubt about the mission by over-preparing. Another team member was favoring his left leg slightly, suggesting an old injury that could become problematic during extended hiking. Most concerning was Kozlov himself. Despite his professional demeanor, he was making decisions based on doctrine rather than current conditions. The route he had chosen was textbook correct for normal weather, but the storm approaching from the northwest was anything but normal. 20 minutes into their march, the first snowflakes began to fall. Within an hour, the light dusting had become a steady snowfall that reduced visibility to less than 50 yards. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 30 minutes, and the wind began to howl through the pine trees with a sound like incoming artillery. Zara keyed her radio. Guide 1 to team leader. Recommend immediate shelter. This storm is intensifying faster than predicted. Kozlov's response came through static and wind noise. Team leader to Guide 1. We maintain current pace. Checkpoint. Alpha has adequate shelter facilities. Negative team leader. At current conditions, Checkpoint Alpha is still 4 hours away. We need shelter now. Guide 1, your concerns are noted. Team leader out. The radio went silent, leaving Zara alone with her growing certainty that they were walking into a disaster. The storm wasn't just bad weather, it was becoming a life-threatening emergency. That required immediate action. She had seen conditions like this kill experienced mountaineers who made small mistakes or ignored warning signs. 30 minutes later, the first casualty occurred. The soldier with the Boston accent, whose name she had learned was Rodriguez, stepped wrong on a snow-covered boulder and went down hard. The crack of breaking bone was audible even over the wind, and his scream of pain cut through the storm. Like a knife, Zara was moving before Kozlov had time to issue orders. her medical training overriding whatever chain of command protocols were supposed to govern the exercise. Rodriguez was lying in the snow, his right leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face gray with shock and pain. "Compound fracture of the tibia," she said, kneeling beside him and opening her medical kit. "Possible fibula involvement. He needs immediate stabilization and evacuation." Kozlov approached, his expression grim. "How immediate?" "As in right now. This kind of fracture in these conditions can lead to compartment syndrome, arterial damage. Or worse, he needs a hospital, not a training exercise. Evacuation isn't possible until the storm passes. Can you stabilize him for transport?" Zara was already working, cutting away Rodriguez's boot and pants leg to expose the injury. The bone had broken through the skin, creating an open wound that was bleeding steadily into the snow. In a hospital, this would require immediate surgery. In the middle of a wilderness storm, it was potentially fatal. "I can stabilize the fracture and control the bleeding," she said, assembling a field splint from materials in her pack. "But he needs 4 fluids, antibiotics, and surgical intervention within hours, not days." As she worked, the rest of the team formed a defensive perimeter around them, their weapons ready despite the supposed training nature of the exercise. The reaction was automatic and professional, but it confirmed Zara's growing suspicion that this operation was more than military. Survival training. Rodriguez's injury required 20 minutes of intensive field medicine to stabilize. Zara used techniques she had learned in combat zones, working by feel in the swirling snow while the wind tried to tear her equipment from her hands. When she finished, Rodriguez was conscious and stable, but his condition remained serious. "He can't continue the mission," she told Kozlov. "Someone needs to stay with him while the rest of you proceed to Checkpoint Alpha." Kozlov's expression was stone-cold professional. Negative. Mission parameters require the entire team to reach the objective. "Rodriguez comes with us. He'll die if you try to move him in these conditions. He'll die if we leave him here alone. At least moving gives him a chance." The logic was brutally practical and completely wrong. Zara had seen commanders make similar decisions before, usually in situations where military objectives outweighed individual safety. But this was supposed to be a training exercise, not a combat operation where casualties were acceptable losses. "There's a ranger station 2 miles south of here," she said. "Shelter, communications, medical supplies. I can get him there safely while you continue to your objective." Kozlov considered this for exactly 5 seconds. Unacceptable. Team integrity is non-negotiable. That was when Zara knew for certain that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire operation. No training exercise prioritized mission completion over preventing unnecessary casualties. No survival course required participants to ignore basic safety protocols. And no legitimate military operation would continue in conditions that guaranteed additional injuries. The storm continued to intensify as they resumed their march, now carrying Rodriguez on an improvised stretcher that slowed their progress and exhausted the men taking turns as bearers. Within another hour, 2 more team members were showing signs of hypothermia, and the soldier who had been favoring his left leg was now limping badly enough to affect the entire group's movement. Zara found herself moving up and down the column, checking on each team member and providing medical attention for injuries that were becoming more frequent as fatigue and cold took their toll. Her small size, which had earned dismissive comments earlier, now proved advantageous as she moved easily through terrain that left larger men struggling. When the radio crackled with an incoming transmission, Kozlov answered immediately despite the communication protocols he had established earlier. "Team leader, this is command. What's your status?" Brennan's voice was clear through the static, suggesting he was monitoring their progress from a comfortable command post somewhere with heat and dry clothes. "Command, we're approximately 6 clicks from Checkpoint Alpha. 1 casualty, compound fracture. Weather conditions severe but manageable. Zara wanted to scream at the understatement. Conditions weren't manageable, they were becoming deadly with each passing hour. But challenging a team leader's assessment over an open radio channel would undermine whatever authority she had left. Understood, team leader. Mission timeline remains critical. Proceed as planned. Copy command. Team leader out. As they struggled through deepening snow toward an objective that seemed increasingly meaningless, Zara began to understand that she had been manipulated into something far more dangerous than a training exercise. Someone had wanted her specifically for this operation, had tracked down a dead woman and threatened her new identity to ensure her cooperation. The question was why? What made Phoenix so essential to whatever was really happening in the Blackrock Mountains? And why was Colonel Brennan willing to sacrifice an entire team of contractors to achieve his objectives? The answer came 2 hours later when they finally reached Checkpoint Alpha and discovered that it wasn't an abandoned ranger station or military facility. It was a temporary command post surrounded by enough firepower to fight a small war, manned by soldiers whose insignia she didn't recognize and equipment that definitely wasn't standard issue. As they approached the perimeter, sentries challenged them with weapons ready and attitudes that suggested shoot-first protocols. When Kozlov provided the correct authentication codes, they were waved through into a compound that looked more like a forward operating base than a training facility. Colonel Brennan was waiting for them in the command tent, studying satellite imagery and tactical displays that showed real-time intelligence data. When he looked up at their bedraggled group, his expression showed satisfaction rather than concern. For their condition. Excellent work, Sergeant Major. Right on schedule despite the weather. Zara stepped forward, her patience finally exhausted. Colonel, we have wounded men who need immediate medical attention. This exercise needs to end now. Brennan's smile was cold and calculating. Exercise? I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Guide 1. This isn't a training exercise. It's a combat operation, and you've just helped us prove that our intelligence about the terrain was accurate. The words hit her like a physical blow. Everything suddenly made sense, the excessive secrecy, the contractor team, the weapons and equipment that exceeded training requirements. She hadn't been recruited to support a military exercise. She had been used to guide an illegal military operation onto American soil. What's the real objective? She demanded. Brennan gestured toward the tactical displays showing the surrounding area. There's a facility approximately 10 kilometers from here. Underground, heavily fortified, and containing materials that certain interested parties would prefer, remained undiscovered. Your job was to get this team into position without triggering the facility's perimeter sensors. And my job now? Now you help us complete the mission. Because if you don't, everyone you've guided this far dies, including yourself. As armed guards moved to flank her position, Zara realized that Phoenix hadn't been recruited for this operation. She had been kidnapped, and everyone she had tried to help was now a potential casualty in whatever conspiracy had followed her into the wilderness. The storm outside was nothing compared to what was brewing within the Blackrock Mountains. What Colonel Brennan's team had identified as a classified storage depot was in reality something far more sinister. According to the intelligence Zara had been forced to review at gunpoint, it was a covert black site run by a task force so secret it didn't officially exist. A facility where banned weapons were tested, detainees vanished into unsanctioned interrogation programs, and experiments were conducted that would trigger public outrage if ever revealed. Zara sat stiffly in a cramped command tent, listening as Brennan laid out an assault plan that chilled her to the core. The target wasn't just a high-security installation, it held damning evidence. Records of war crimes committed by senior military officials, systematic executions of whistleblowers, and a money trail that could unravel a web of shell companies, black budgets, and secret contractor operations. Our primary goal is data retrieval, Brennan said, gesturing to the schematics of the facility displayed on a rugged tablet. Server rooms on levels 2 and 3 contain encrypted archives going back over 15 years. Secondary objective: destroy anything that could compromise individuals in active roles. Kozlov studied the diagrams, his tone clinical. What's the security profile? Minimal staff, around 12 personnel on site, Brennan replied. But the facility is equipped with automated defenses and can request rapid response units from Peterson. We have a 4-hour window before satellite surveillance resumes. This has to be surgical. Zara felt sick. This wasn't an operation to expose corruption. It was a cover-up under the guise of black ops. American operatives preparing to assault a government facility on U.S. soil. And she was the one who had unknowingly guided them into position. Whatever horrors that site might conceal, this wasn't the way to confront them. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Brennan gave her a calculated look. "We need you to get us through the front door. The external sensors are programmed to ignore unarmed civilians. You'll approach the entrance posing as a lost hiker caught in the storm." "You're serious?" she asked, incredulous. "Just walk up and ask to come inside." "Precisely. Once inside, you'll disable internal security from the control room. Then you'll signal the team to move in. Clean and simple." It was a bold plan, deceptively straightforward and morally appalling. Refusing would likely get her killed. Cooperating would make her complicit in a domestic attack and the destruction of vital evidence. Either path would destroy any hope of returning to her old life in Millfield. But there was a third option, one Brennan hadn't anticipated. Phoenix had survived worse by thinking outside rigid tactical playbooks. Commanders like Brennan, trained to rely on brute force, often overlooked quieter alternatives. "I'll need a cover story," she said. "Civilian-grade comms gear, medical supplies, and a plausible reason for carrying high-end equipment. Otherwise, I'll get flagged before I even reach the door." Brennan nodded. "Kozlov will get you whatever you need. We move in 2 hours." As the briefing ended and the team dispersed, Zara's thoughts shifted to Rodriguez, the wounded contractor still lying in the makeshift medical tent. His injury should have warranted an immediate medevac, but with Brennan's true agenda revealed, it was clear Rodriguez had been written off. He was just another asset deemed expendable. Under the pretext of checking on his condition, Zara headed to the medic's tent. What she really needed was someone who might be open to reason. The team's medic, Harris, was inside, adjusting the splint on Rodriguez's leg. He hadn't said much during the mission briefing, but she'd sensed hesitation, maybe even doubt. "How's he doing?" she asked quietly. Harris looked up, concern etched on his face. "He's stable for now, but this won't hold. He needs real treatment. And if he doesn't get it," she pressed, "best case, he loses the leg. Worst case, he doesn't make it." Zara glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then stepped closer to Harris. "What do you know about the real objective of this mission?" Harris hesitated, clearly torn between operational security and medical ethics. "I know it's not what we were told when we signed the contracts. I know Rodriguez is being sacrificed for something that has nothing to do with national security. Are you willing to help me try to change that?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge to everything they had both sworn to protect. Harris studied her face, clearly trying to assess whether she was testing his loyalty or offering him a chance to do the right thing. "What did you have in mind?" Over the next 30 minutes, while the assault team prepared their equipment and studied the facility schematics, Zara and Harris developed an alternative plan that might save lives on both sides of the coming conflict. It required precise timing, considerable risk, and a willingness to trust each other completely, despite having known each other for less than a day. The key was the facility's communication system. According to Brennan's intelligence, the installation maintained contact with its command authority through encrypted satellite links that operated on classified frequencies. If Zara could access those communications during her infiltration, she might be able to warn the facility's personnel about the incoming assault and coordinate a response that didn't result in a massacre. Harris provided her with medical equipment that contained hidden communication devices, drugs that could incapacitate without killing, and emergency supplies that might be needed if the situation deteriorated beyond anyone's ability to control. Most importantly, he gave her access to Rodriguez's medical records, which contained information that might prove crucial to understanding why Brennan had targeted this particular facility. As the storm continued to rage outside, Zara reviewed everything she knew about the operation and tried to identify the missing pieces that would explain Brennan's true motivation. Military officers didn't typically risk their careers and freedom to assault classified installations unless the stakes were extraordinarily high. Whatever was in that underground facility, it was important enough to justify murder and treason. The answer came when she cross-referenced Rodriguez's military service record with the personnel files that Brennan had shown her earlier. Rodriguez had served in the same unit as several officers who had died under suspicious circumstances over the past 2 years. More significantly, he had been part of a classified operation in Syria that had resulted in civilian casualties covered up by Pentagon officials. Rodriguez wasn't just a contractor hired for this mission. He was a witness to war crimes who had been marked for elimination. The entire operation was designed to look like a military accident that would kill him and anyone else who might expose the truth about illegal operations conducted under the previous administration. Brennan hadn't recruited Zara to guide his team to the facility. He had lured her out of hiding so that Phoenix could be eliminated along with the other witnesses. The woman who had once specialized in impossible rescues was being set up to die in what would appear to be a failed assault on a classified installation. But Phoenix had survived impossible situations before by turning the hunters into the hunted. If Brennan wanted to use her as bait, she would make sure the trap closed on him instead of her. 2 hours before the scheduled assault, Zara began her approach to the facility through terrain that would have challenged an experienced mountaineer under normal conditions. In the middle of a blizzard, with visibility near zero and temperatures dropping below survival levels, it was nearly suicide. But Phoenix had operated in worse conditions and survived situations that had killed better-equipped soldiers. The facility's external appearance was carefully designed to resemble an abandoned mining operation, complete with rusted equipment and buildings that looked like they hadn't been occupied in decades. Only the subtle heat signatures visible through thermal imaging and the buried communication cables revealed its true nature as an active military installation. Zara approached the main entrance as planned, playing the role of a lost hiker who had become separated from her group during the storm. The guards who responded to her desperate knocking were professional but not overly suspicious. People did occasionally become lost in the Blackrock Mountains, and the storm provided a plausible explanation for how a civilian might have ended up at their classified location. Once inside, she was escorted to a holding area while the facility's security personnel verified her identity and decided how to handle her presence. The process gave her time to study the installation's layout and identify the key systems she would need to access to change the outcome of Brennan's assault. The facility commander, a middle-aged Army colonel named Patricia Hayes, interviewed Zara personally rather than delegating the task to subordinates. Hayes was clearly experienced in dealing with security breaches and classified operations, but she was also professional enough to treat an apparent civilian with appropriate courtesy. Miss Novak, according to your identification, you're a wilderness survival instructor from Millfield. What were you doing in this area during a severe weather advisory? Zara had prepared for this question, but her answer contained enough truth to be convincing. I was guiding a military training exercise in the area. We became separated during the storm, and I've been trying to find my way back to the rally point. Hayes consulted a tablet displaying area maps and weather data. Military training exercise? We weren't notified of any authorized operations. In this sector, it was classified above my clearance level. All I know is that I was supposed to guide a contractor team through navigation exercises and provide medical support if needed. The explanation was technically accurate while omitting the crucial details that would reveal Brennan's true intentions. Hayes seemed satisfied with the response, but Zara could see her making mental notes about security protocols that might need to be reviewed. We'll contact Peterson Air Force Base to coordinate your return to your unit once weather conditions improve, Hayes said. In the meantime, you're welcome to wait in our facility. Medical will check you for hypothermia or other weather-related injuries. As Zara was escorted through the facility's corridors, she memorized the locations of critical systems and personnel. The installation was larger than Brennan's intelligence had suggested, with at least 50 people on duty and security measures that would make his assault considerably more difficult than planned. More importantly, she recognized several faces from classified briefings she had attended during her time with Phantom Division. These weren't criminals hiding evidence of war crimes. They were intelligence analysts and special operations personnel working on legitimate national security projects. Whatever information Brennan hoped to steal or destroy, it wasn't evidence of illegal activities. It was classified intelligence that he planned to sell to foreign buyers, just as Lieutenant Webb had done with Ghost Squadron operational details. The entire operation was an elaborate cover for espionage and treason, disguised as righteous exposure of government corruption. The medical examination provided Zara with the opportunity she needed to access the facility's communication systems. While the medic checked her vital signs and treated minor injuries from her trek through the storm, she was able to plant Harris's communication devices and establish contact with the outside world. Her first transmission went to Dylan Cross, her former partner from Phantom Division, who now worked in Pentagon intelligence. The message was brief and encoded in a format that would immediately identify it as a Phoenix priority alert. Dylan, this is Phoenix. Emergency Protocol 7. Brennan compromised. Facility assault imminent. Need immediate backup. The response came within minutes, confirming that her message had been received and that help was being mobilized. But Cross's reply also contained information that changed everything about her understanding of the situation. Phoenix, Brennan operating under presidential directive. Facility contains evidence of coup attempt. Your status unclear. Recommend immediate extraction. The words hit her like a physical blow. If Brennan was operating under direct presidential authority, then the facility really did contain evidence of illegal activities at the highest levels of government. Her presence wasn't coincidental. She had been specifically selected because Phoenix had a reputation for completing impossible missions regardless of political considerations. But Cross's warning about her unclear status suggested that she had been marked as a potential security risk, someone who knew too much about classified operations to be allowed to operate independently. Whether she helped Brennan complete his mission or tried to stop him, she was unlikely to survive the night. The only option left was to create a third outcome that neither Brennan nor his superiors had anticipated. Phoenix had built her reputation on achieving impossible objectives through unconventional methods. Tonight, she would have to rescue everyone. Facility personnel, Brennan's team, and herself from a situation that seemed designed to eliminate all witnesses. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility, indicating an imminent assault, Zara realized that her quiet life as a wilderness instructor was truly over. Phoenix was about to rise from the ashes one final time, and this mission would either restore her honor or destroy her completely. The battle for the truth was about to begin, and the small woman whom everyone underestimated was the only person Who could prevent it from becoming a massacre that would bury the real conspiracy forever? The assault began at exactly 0200 hours. With the kind of precision that marked professional military operations, Brennan's team moved through the storm like ghosts, using the howling wind and driving snow to mask their approach to the facility's perimeter. Zara watched from the facility's security center as thermal imaging displays showed 12 figures advancing in coordinated formation toward the main entrance. Colonel Hayes stood beside her, studying the tactical situation with the calm professionalism of someone who had faced similar threats before. The facility's defense systems were more sophisticated than Brennan had anticipated, including automated weapons platforms and reinforced defensive positions that could hold off a much larger assault force. 12 men, Hayes observed, noting the attackers' positions on the display screens. Professional movement patterns, military-grade equipment. This isn't a random terrorist attack. Zara knew she had reached the moment of truth. Everything that happened in the next few minutes would determine whether she could prevent a massacre or become complicit in whatever conspiracy had brought her to this place. The communication device Harris had provided was still active, giving her the ability to coordinate with Brennan's team if she chose to honor her original mission parameters. Instead, she made a decision that would have surprised everyone who thought they understood her motivations. "Colonel Hayes, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible," she said, turning away from the security displays to face the facility commander directly. "My name isn't Zara Novak. I'm Captain Elena Vasquez, formerly of Phantom Division Combat Search and Rescue. I've been living under an assumed identity for 3 years, and I was coerced into guiding that assault team to your location." Hayes's expression shifted from professional concern to sharp attention. Phantom Division was disbanded. All personnel were either reassigned or listed as killed in action. "Phoenix doesn't stay dead when people need saving," Zara replied, using her old call sign for the first time in 3 years. "Right now, there are wounded men in that assault team who were manipulated into this operation, just like I was. Colonel Brennan is using all of us to cover up his real objective, which is stealing classified intelligence to sell to foreign buyers." The facility's alarms continued to wail as Hayes processed this information. Through the security monitors, they could see Brennan's team taking positions around the facility's main entrance, preparing breaching charges that would allow them to assault the installation's defensive positions. "What do you propose?" Hayes asked. "Let me talk to them." Brennan's men are contractors who thought they were participating in a legitimate operation. If they understand what's really happening, some of them might be willing to stand down. Hayes consulted her tactical displays, noting that the facility's automated defenses were tracking multiple targets and preparing to engage. "You have 5 minutes before my security protocols require lethal force authorization." Zara activated the communication device and switched to the frequency that Brennan's team was using for operational coordination. Her transmission cut through, their tactical chatter like a knife through silk. "This is Phoenix to all Blackrock team members. You are assaulting a legitimate U.S. military installation under false pretenses. Colonel Brennan has lied to you about the mission objectives and your legal authority to conduct this operation." The response was immediate and came from multiple voices simultaneously, creating a cacophony of confusion and anger that suggested her words had hit their intended target. Kozlov's voice emerged from the chaos with deadly calm. "Phoenix, this is Team Leader. Explain your statement." "Sergeant Major, you and your men were hired to participate in what you believed was a classified counterintelligence operation. In reality, you're conducting an illegal assault on American personnel for the purpose of stealing national security information. Colonel Brennan plans to sell that information to foreign intelligence services." The radio went silent for nearly 30 seconds, during which Zara could imagine the rapid calculations taking place among professional soldiers who had suddenly realized they might be on the wrong side of a firefight. Brennan's voice cut through the silence with the authority of command and the desperation of someone whose carefully constructed plan was falling apart. All units, ignore the transmission. Phoenix has been compromised by enemy personnel. Proceed with the assault as planned. But the damage was already done. Zara could see through the thermal imaging that several members of the assault team had broken formation and were moving away from their attack positions. Professional soldiers understood the difference between legitimate military operations and criminal activities, and Brennan's reaction had confirmed their worst suspicions about the mission's true nature. Kozlov's voice returned to the radio. But this time he was addressing Brennan directly rather than coordinating with his team. "Colonel, we need immediate clarification of our legal authority for this operation. Written authorization from appropriate command authority." "Sergeant." "Major, you have your orders. Execute them immediately or face court-martial for disobeying direct commands in a combat situation." The threat was both legally meaningless and tactically foolish. Kozlov and his men were contractors, not active-duty military personnel subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. More importantly, Brennan's increasingly frantic demands were confirming everything Zara had told them about the operation's illegitimate nature. Through the facility's external cameras, Zara watched as the assault team began to fragment. 3 men moved away from the facility entirely, disappearing into the storm rather than participate in what they now understood to be a criminal enterprise. 4 others maintained defensive positions but ceased advancing toward the facility's entrance. That left only 5 men still following Brennan's orders, including the colonel himself and 4 soldiers, whose loyalty to their commanding officer outweighed their concerns about legal authorization. It was still enough firepower to cause significant casualties if they continued with the assault, but the odds had shifted dramatically in the facility's favor. Hayes keyed her own communication system, broadcasting on military emergency frequencies that would be monitored by every command authority in the region. "This is Colonel Patricia Hayes, commanding officer of Installation Blackrock 7. We are under assault by unidentified personnel claiming military authority. Request immediate response from Peterson Air Force Base and federal law enforcement." The transmission would bring help, but not quickly enough to prevent casualties if Brennan's remaining followers decided to continue their attack. The storm that had provided cover for their approach would also delay any rescue response by hours. That was when Zara made the decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of remaining safely inside the facility while others fought and died outside, she chose to walk back into the storm and confront the situation directly. "Colonel Hayes, I need you to shut down your automated defenses for exactly 10 minutes. She said, "That's suicide. The moment those systems go offline, they'll breach the facility. Not if I reach them first." Hayes studied Zara's face, clearly trying to assess whether the small woman standing before her was capable of accomplishing what she claimed. "You're talking about walking into a firefight against professional soldiers in the middle of a blizzard. I'm talking about preventing a massacre that will kill innocent people on both sides of this conflict. Brennan's remaining men are following illegal orders, but they're still American soldiers who deserve a chance to surrender rather than die for someone else's crimes." The moral complexity of the situation was evident in Hayes' expression. As a military officer, she was obligated to protect her installation and personnel from attack. As an American, she was reluctant to order the deaths of soldiers who might be acting under illegal orders but still believed they were serving their country. 10 minutes, she said finally. "After that, I have to protect my people." Zara equipped herself with cold weather gear and emergency medical supplies before venturing back into the storm. The contrast between the facility's controlled environment and the brutal conditions outside was shocking: temperatures below zero, wind speeds that made standing upright difficult, and snow falling so heavily that visibility was measured in feet rather than yards. She moved through the darkness using navigation skills learned during night operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, staying low to avoid detection while working her way toward the positions where Brennan's remaining team members had taken cover. The thermal imaging equipment in the facility had shown her their approximate locations, but finding them in the storm would require both skill and considerable luck. The first person she encountered was Rodriguez, the soldier with the broken leg who should have been evacuated hours earlier. He was lying behind a boulder formation, his splinted leg clearly causing him significant pain, but still maintaining a defensive position with his weapon ready. "Rodriguez," she called softly, approaching from an angle that wouldn't trigger his defensive reflexes. "It's Guide 1, I'm here to help." He turned toward her voice, his face gray with pain and cold. "Guide 1? What the hell is going on?" "Kozlov says the mission is compromised, but the Colonel is ordering us to continue." "The assault. The Colonel has been lying to all of you from the beginning. This isn't a legitimate military operation. You're being used to cover up crimes that go all the way to the Pentagon." Rodriguez stared at her through the swirling snow, clearly struggling to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about the mission. "The facility contains evidence of war crimes. We're supposed to retrieve it for congressional oversight. The facility contains legitimate intelligence. Operations. Brennan wants to steal that information to sell to foreign buyers. You're not serving justice, you're enabling treason." The wounded soldier's expression shifted from confusion to anger as the implications became clear. "Son of a bitch used us. Used my injury as cover to get close to the target. He planned for you to die here, Rodriguez, all of you. Dead contractors can't testify about illegal operations." Through the snow, they could hear gunfire erupting from the direction of the facility's main entrance. Brennan had apparently decided to proceed with the assault using whatever personnel remained loyal to him, regardless of the tactical disadvantages or legal consequences. "Can you move?" Zara asked. Rodriguez tested his injured leg and immediately grimaced with pain. "Not far, not fast. Then you're coming with me. We're going to end this before more people die." She helped Rodriguez to his feet, supporting his weight while they moved through the storm toward the sound of combat. The facility's defensive systems had reactivated after the 10-minute window Hayes had provided, and automated weapons were engaging targets that approached the perimeter without proper authorization codes. As they drew closer to the battle, Zara could see muzzle flashes in the darkness and hear the distinctive sound of military-grade weapons being fired in disciplined bursts. Brennan's remaining men were conducting a professional assault on the facility's entrance, using covering fire and movement techniques that would have been effective against most defensive positions. But they were attacking a hardened military installation designed to withstand much more sophisticated threats than a handful of light infantry. The facility's defenses included reinforced positions, overlapping fields of fire, and automated systems that could engage multiple targets simultaneously. "Colonel Brennan," Zara called through the storm, her voice carrying across the battlefield. With trained projection, "This is Captain Elena Vasquez, call sign Phoenix. I'm ordering you to cease fire and surrender to federal authorities." The gunfire stopped for a moment as her words registered with both sides of the conflict. Then Brennan's voice responded with the fury of someone whose carefully planned operation had been systematically destroyed. "Phoenix, you treacherous bitch. You were supposed to disable their defenses, not warn them about the assault." "I was supposed to prevent the massacre of American personnel by a traitor who sold out his own country for money." Mission accomplished. Brennan emerged from his covered position, his weapon trained on Zara despite the tactical disadvantage of exposing himself to the facility's defensive systems. He was close enough that she could see his face clearly in the intermittent illumination from muzzle flashes and facility lighting. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "The information in that facility could expose operations that protect this country from threats you can't even imagine. The information in that facility documents your illegal arms sales, assassination, contracts, and financial arrangements with foreign intelligence services. You're not protecting anything except your own criminal enterprise." The standoff stretched between them like a wire under tension. Two people who had committed their lives to serving their country, now facing each other across a divide created by corruption and betrayal. Around them, the storm continued to rage, and the facility's defenders waited for orders that would determine whether the confrontation ended in surrender or slaughter. That was when the sound of approaching helicopters cut through the wind, their engines unmistakable even in the brutal weather conditions. Hayes's call for assistance had been answered, and federal law enforcement was arriving in force to resolve the situation. Brennan's expression shifted from fury to desperation as he realized that his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Whatever information he had hoped to steal or destroy would soon be protected by overwhelming federal response, making his mission impossible to complete. "Last chance, Phoenix," he said, his weapon still trained on her center mass. "Help me. Complete this mission, or we all die here." "No," Zara replied calmly. "You die here, we go home." The helicopters were close enough now that their searchlights could be seen cutting through the storm, illuminating the battlefield and revealing the tactical situation to the incoming federal agents. Brennan had perhaps 2 minutes before overwhelming force would arrive to arrest him and anyone still supporting his illegal operation. He made his choice with the desperate calculation of someone who had already lost everything and decided to take as many people with him as possible. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Zara saw her own death approaching with crystal clarity. That was when Rodriguez, the wounded soldier she had been supporting, shifted his weight and drove his shoulder into Brennan's midsection with enough force to disrupt his aim. The colonel's shot went wide, and the two men went down in the snow together, struggling for control of the weapon. The facility's automated defenses, programmed to engage any armed personnel who threatened the installation, immediately targeted Brennan's exposed position. But Rodriguez was too close to the colonel for the systems to engage without risking friendly fire casualties. Zara moved without conscious thought, her training taking over as she closed the distance between herself and the struggling men. She had perhaps 3 seconds before the facility's defensive systems would fire on both targets, and perhaps 5 seconds before Brennan regained control of his weapon. What happened next would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it as the moment when Phoenix proved that heroes were measured not by their size, but by their willingness to sacrifice everything for people who couldn't protect themselves. The small woman, who had been mocked for her appearance, was about to demonstrate why Phoenix had become a legend among the warriors who fought America's secret wars. Zara hit Brennan with a precision tackle that would have impressed a professional linebacker, driving him away from Rodriguez and sending his weapon spinning into the snow. The impact drove all three of them into a heap beside the boulder formation, but it also triggered the facility's automated response systems that had been tracking multiple armed targets in the restricted zone. The defensive platforms opened fire with mechanical precision, their targeting computers calculating trajectories and engagement angles while the three figures struggled in the snow. Bullets sparked off rocks and buried themselves in the frozen ground around them, creating a deadly perimeter that trapped them in place while the incoming helicopters grew louder overhead. Brennan recovered first, his years of combat experience allowing him to orient himself, despite the disorienting impact. He lunged for his dropped weapon, his fingers closing around the grip, just as Zara tackled him again. This time, however, the colonel was ready for her attack. He rolled with her momentum and came up on top, using his superior size and weight to pin her against the snow-covered ground. "You sanctimonious little bitch," he snarled, pressing the barrel of his sidearm against her temple. "Did you really think you could stop this operation single-handedly?" Rodriguez struggled to reach them despite his broken leg, but the pain and snow made movement almost impossible. He could only watch as Brennan prepared to execute the woman who had tried to save them all from a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. But Zara had been in similar situations before, times when death seemed inevitable and survival required thinking beyond conventional options. During her time with Phantom Division, she had learned that the most effective weapons weren't always the largest or most obvious ones. Sometimes the smallest advantage could change the outcome of an entire engagement. "You made one mistake, Colonel," she said calmly, despite having a gun pressed to her head. "You assumed I came out here alone." Brennan's expression shifted to confusion just as Harris emerged from the storm behind him. The team medic had followed Zara into the blizzard, carrying medical supplies and a determination to prevent any more unnecessary casualties. He moved with the quiet precision of someone trained in battlefield medicine, someone who understood that sometimes healing required violence. The syringe that Harris drove into Brennan's neck contained enough sedative to drop a man twice the colonel's size. The effect was almost immediate. Brennan's grip on his weapon loosened, his eyes lost focus, and his body began to go limp as the powerful drug coursed through his system. "Fast-acting benzodiazepine compound," Harris explained as Brennan collapsed into the snow. "He'll be unconscious for at least 6 hours, possibly longer given the cold and stress factors." The facility's automated defenses immediately registered that the armed threat had been neutralized, and the weapons platforms ceased firing. In the sudden silence, the approaching helicopters sounded like thunder rolling across the mountains, their searchlights now close enough to illuminate the entire battlefield. Zara helped Rodriguez to his feet while Harris checked Brennan's vital signs to ensure the sedative hadn't caused any life-threatening complications. Despite everything the colonel had done, none of them wanted his death on their conscience. "How many others are still out there?" Harris asked, gesturing toward the positions where Brennan's team had originally deployed. "3 confirmed deserted when they learned the truth about the mission," Zara replied. 2 more were maintaining defensive positions, but not advancing. That leaves maybe 4 still following Brennan's orders, but they'll probably surrender once they see federal backup arriving. The first helicopter touched down in a clearing 200 yards from the facility, disgorging a team of federal agents in full tactical gear. They moved with the disciplined efficiency of people who had responded to similar situations before, establishing a perimeter and calling for the surrender of any remaining hostile personnel. Through her communication device, Zara could hear the confused chatter of Brennan's remaining men as they tried to understand what had happened to their commanding officer and how to respond to the federal agents who were demanding their immediate surrender. Kozlov's voice cut through the confusion with professional authority. "All Blackrock team members, this is Sergeant Major Kozlov. Lay down your weapons and surrender to federal authorities. Mission is terminated. Repeat, mission is terminated." The response was immediate and professionally coordinated. Weapons were placed on the ground, hands were raised, and the remaining contractors began moving toward the federal agents with the disciplined compliance of soldiers who understood. They had been caught in an impossible situation. Within 20 minutes, the entire area was under federal control. Brennan was loaded onto a medical helicopter for transport to a secure medical facility where he could be treated and then held pending federal charges for treason, conspiracy, and violation of numerous military regulations. Rodriguez was also evacuated for emergency surgery on his fractured leg, but his prognosis was excellent thanks to the field medicine that Zara and Harris had provided during the mission. The other contractors were processed as material witnesses rather than co-conspirators, once federal investigators confirmed that they had been deceived about the operation's true nature. Colonel Hayes emerged from the facility as the immediate crisis was being resolved, approaching Zara with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal curiosity. "Captain Vasquez," she said, using Zara's real rank for the first time. "I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I thought you were just a civilian who had gotten lost in the storm." "I prefer it that way," Zara replied. "Phoenix works best when people underestimate what she's capable of." "Well, you certainly demonstrated capabilities tonight that exceeded everyone's expectations. The question now is what happens next." That question was answered 2 hours later, when a convoy of black SUVs arrived through the storm, carrying officials whose credentials indicated involvement in the highest levels of national security operations. The lead vehicle disgorged a familiar figure, Dylan Cross, Zara's former partner from Phantom Division, now wearing the uniform of Pentagon intelligence with enough rank insignia to command immediate respect from everyone present. "Elena," he said, approaching her with a smile that mixed professional admiration with personal relief. "When I got your message, I wasn't sure if you were calling for backup or saying goodbye." "Both," she admitted. "This whole operation was designed to eliminate witnesses to Brennan's criminal activities. If you hadn't responded so quickly, we'd all be casualties by now." Cross gestured toward the federal agents who were still processing the scene and collecting evidence. "Brennan's been under investigation for almost a year. Financial crimes, arms dealing, assassination contracts, the works. We knew he was planning something big, but we didn't know when or where until your emergency transmission. So the facility really does contain evidence of his criminal activities. Among other things, Colonel Hayes runs a legitimate intelligence analysis operation that was tracking Brennan's network. When he realized they were getting close to exposing him, he decided to destroy the evidence and eliminate the witnesses." Zara looked around. At the aftermath of the night's events, federal agents securing evidence, medical personnel treating the wounded, and the storm finally beginning to subside as dawn approached over the Blackrock Mountains. What about the contractors? They were manipulated into participating in this operation. Material witnesses, like I said. Most of them will face administrative penalties and loss of security clearances, but no criminal charges. Kozlov and Harris will probably be offered positions in federal law enforcement. We need people with their skills and integrity. And Phoenix? Cross's expression became more serious. That depends on what Phoenix wants. Your cover identity. As Zara Novak is still secure, but your actions tonight have put you back on the government's radar. You can return to civilian life, or you can come back to work for people who appreciate what you're capable of accomplishing. The offer hung in the air like a challenge to everything Zara thought she wanted from her future. 3 years of quiet civilian life had given her peace, but tonight had reminded her of the satisfaction that came from using her skills to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. "I need some time to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Phoenix isn't just a call sign. It's a symbol of someone who rises from the ashes to fight for justice." Tonight proved that the legend is still very much alive. As the federal convoy prepared to depart with their prisoners and evidence, Zara found herself standing alone in the early morning light, watching the sun rise over mountains that had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature in a single night. Harris approached her as she prepared to leave with the evacuation helicopter that would return her to civilian life. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving us the chance to do the right thing. Thank Rodriguez when you see him. He's the one who tackled Brennan when it mattered most." "I will. But Rodriguez was following your lead. You showed all of us that sometimes the smallest person in the room is the only one big enough to stand up for what's right." The flight back to Millfield took 90 minutes through clearing skies that revealed the full majesty of the Blackrock Mountains in daylight. From the air, the facility looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, an abandoned mining operation that held no secrets and threatened no one. But Zara knew that appearances could be deceiving, that the most important battles were often fought by people who looked like they had no business being warriors. Tonight, a woman who weighed barely over 100 pounds had carried a full colonel and his entire conspiracy through 5 miles of enemy fire, not literally, but in every way that mattered. 3 months later, Zara Novak reopened Blackrock. Adventures with an expanded staff and a new focus on training programs for military veterans transitioning to civilian careers. The official story was that she had received a federal contract to provide wilderness survival training for government personnel, which explained the occasional visits from people whose credentials indicated involvement in classified operations. Unofficially, Phoenix had found a new mission that combined the skills she had learned in secret wars with the peace she had discovered in civilian life. The small wilderness instructor who taught corporate executives how to build campfires was also training federal agents how to survive in hostile environments and rescue people from situations that officially never happened. On quiet evenings when the Montana sky was clear and the mountains stood like silent sentinels against the horizon, Zara would sometimes receive encrypted messages on frequencies that very few people knew existed. Dylan Cross checking in with operational updates, Harris reporting on Rodriguez's recovery from surgery, or Kozlov describing his new position with the FBI's Tactical Response Unit. But the message that meant the most came from a young woman named Sarah Williams, an Army aviation officer who had decided to walk away from a classified recruitment program after receiving guidance from someone who understood the difference between serving your country and serving the people who claim to represent it. Phoenix, the message read, "Thank you for showing me that legends aren't about the size of the person, but the size of their courage. I'm teaching wilderness survival at Fort Carson now, helping soldiers learn skills that might save their lives someday." Turns out the smallest packages sometimes contain the most explosive surprises. Zara smiled as she deleted the message and prepared for another peaceful evening in the town that had become her sanctuary. Tomorrow there would be another group of students to teach, another opportunity to share skills that might help someone survive whatever challenges they faced. But tonight, she would sit on her porch and watch the stars appear over the Blackrock Mountains, knowing that sometimes the most important victories were measured not in enemies defeated, but in people saved from becoming someone they never wanted to be. Phoenix had risen from the ashes once again, not through violence or vengeance, but through the simple act of refusing to let good people be destroyed by evil ones. And in a world that often measured worth by size and strength, she had proven that the biggest heroes sometimes came in the smallest packages. The legend of Phoenix lived on, not in classified files or military records, but in the hearts of people who had learned that courage wasn't about being unafraid, it was about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Colonel Marcus Brennan had mocked her size until she carried him through enemy fire. But the real victory wasn't in proving him wrong. It was in proving that honor, integrity, and the willingness to sacrifice for others would always be bigger than the people who tried to destroy them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.